Marcus Rivera's phone buzzed against his nightstand at 3:47 a.m., the shrill emergency tone cutting through his deep sleep like a blade. Water damage claims always came at the worst times, usually when pipes burst in the dead of winter or storms overwhelmed aging infrastructure. He'd handled hundreds of these cases in his 12 years as a senior insurance investigator, but nothing could have prepared him for what he'd find when he stumbled downstairs to his basement apartment. The first sensation wasn't sight but sound, a steady drip 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 that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. Marcus flicked on the lights and felt his stomach drop. 3 inches of murky water covered his hardwood floors, lapping at the legs of his vintage leather couch and seeping into boxes of photographs he'd been meaning to organize for months. His laptop, thankfully elevated on the coffee table, sat like an island in a sea of destruction. Son of a, he caught himself, running both hands through his disheveled hair as he surveyed the damage. The water appeared to be coming from the ceiling, specifically from the area directly below apartment 4B, his upstairs neighbor. Marcus had lived in the converted Victorian for 2 years, and had barely exchanged more than polite nods with the woman above him. He knew she was young, probably late 20s, with dark hair that she wore in a perpetual messy bun. She worked odd hours. He'd hear her footsteps at all times of day and night, and occasionally caught glimpses of her struggling with groceries or packages. Sarah something. Chen, maybe. Now, as he waded through his flooded living space in boxer shorts and an old college t-shirt, Marcus felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. This wasn't just water damage. This was his life, his sanctuary, his carefully curated space that represented 2 years of rebuilding after his divorce. He grabbed his phone and dialed his property manager, knowing full well that Janet wouldn't appreciate the early morning call, but not caring. After 20 minutes of back and forth, he learned that 4B's kitchen had somehow flooded, a washing machine malfunction. Janet mumbled through obvious grogginess, and the water had found every possible route down into his unit. By 6 a.m., Marcus was showered, dressed in his standard investigator uniform of khakis and polo shirt, and heading to his office at Consolidated Insurance Group. He needed coffee, he needed answers, and he needed to start the claims process for his own damages. The irony wasn't lost on him. Investigating other people's disasters was his job, but being on the receiving end felt completely different. Rivera, good, you're here early. His supervisor, Bill Hartman, appeared at his cubicle before Marcus had even powered up his computer. Got a rush job for you. Water damage claim came in overnight. Should be straightforward, but the client's being pushy about timeline. Bill dropped a manila folder on Marcus's desk, and the name on the tab made his blood freeze. Sarah Chen, 1247 Maple Street, apartment 4B. Marcus stared at the folder, his coffee growing cold in his hand. His basement was still drying out from this woman's negligence, and now he was supposed to investigate her claim with professional objectivity. The conflict of interest was staggering, but admitting it would mean explaining his personal connection, potentially removing him from a case that could take weeks to reassign. Problem, Rivera? Bill's voice carried an edge of impatience. No, sir, Marcus heard himself say, opening the folder to scan the preliminary details. No problem at all. But as he read Sarah Chen's statement about a sudden appliance failure that had caused extensive damage to her kitchen and bathroom, Marcus knew this case would be anything but straightforward, especially when the woman who'd flooded his home had no idea she was about to be investigated by her victim. Marcus sat in his Honda Civic outside 1247 Maple Street for 10 minutes, staring at the familiar Victorian that housed both his ruined basement and his next assignment. The ethical implications of investigating his own neighbor's claim gnawed at him, but backing out now would raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Besides, a part of him, the part still angry about his waterlogged photographs and ruined hardwood, wanted to see exactly what Sarah Chen had to say about her appliance malfunction. He climbed the familiar stairs to the second floor, noting details he'd never paid attention to before: the loose banister, the worn carpet, the faint smell of vanilla candles that seemed to follow Sarah's presence throughout the building. When he knocked on 4B, the door opened almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the window. "Ms. Chen, I'm Marcus Rivera from Consolidated Insurance Group." He held up his badge, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition. There was none, just the tired relief of someone who'd been waiting for help. "Thank God, please come in. I'm so sorry about the mess." Sarah stepped aside, and Marcus got his first real look at her space. The woman he'd only glimpsed in passing was prettier than he'd realized, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed older than her years. But those eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and her apartment told a story he hadn't expected. The kitchen was indeed flooded, or had been. Someone had clearly spent hours cleaning up, but water stains on the lower cabinets and warped flooring told the tale. What struck Marcus most, however, was how sparse everything was. No dishwasher, minimal appliances, furniture that looked secondhand at best. This wasn't the apartment of someone committing insurance fraud for profit. "Can you walk me through what happened?" Marcus pulled out his tablet, falling into the familiar rhythm of an investigation while trying to ignore the fact that he was standing directly above his own disaster zone. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that seemed more protective than cold. "I was doing laundry around midnight. I work late shifts at the hospital, so that's normal for me. The washing machine is in the kitchen because there's no other hookup." She pointed to a corner where water stains marked the floor. "It just exploded. Like the hose came loose and water went everywhere." Exploded. Marcus looked up from his notes. That's an interesting word choice. A flush crept up Sarah's neck. Poor choice of words. It happened fast, though. By the time I got the water turned off, it had spread to the bathroom, and, she gestured helplessly, I spent all night trying to clean up. I felt terrible about bothering the neighbors below. Marcus nearly choked. She felt terrible. His entire living room was still uninhabitable, and she felt terrible. But something in her voice, genuine distress, not the calculated concern of someone working an angle, gave him pause. "Had you been having problems with the machine before this?" He walked over to examine the connection points, noting that the washing machine was gone. "Where's the appliance now?" "I had to throw it out. It was old, secondhand when I bought it." Sarah's voice became smaller. "I couldn't afford to have it repaired, and I was worried about it happening again." Red flags began waving in Marcus's trained mind. Disposing of evidence was fraud investigation 101, but Sarah's demeanor didn't match the profile of a scammer. She seemed genuinely distressed, not calculating, and the apartment itself suggested someone struggling financially, not someone orchestrating an elaborate scheme. "Ms. Chen, I have to ask, do you have any idea if the water might have affected the unit below you?" The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening with what appeared to be genuine horror. "Oh my God, I never even thought. Is someone living down there? I thought it might be storage or..." She sank into one of her two kitchen chairs. "How bad is it?" Marcus found himself in the surreal position of wanting to comfort the woman who destroyed his home. Her distress seemed so authentic, so different from the calculated responses he usually encountered during investigations. But training kicked in, overriding empathy. "The investigation will determine the extent of damages to other units," he said formally, making notes about her reaction. "Right now, I need to focus on your claim. Can you show me your receipts for the washing machine? Any maintenance records?" For the next hour, Marcus conducted what might have been the most conflicted investigation of his career. Every question was colored by personal investment, every answer filtered through his own loss. Sarah produced a handful of receipts: the washing machine purchased from Craigslist 8 months ago, a repair attempt 3 months back when it had started making noise, even grocery receipts showing the cleaning supplies she bought in bulk after the flood. What emerged was a picture of someone barely making ends meet, working night shifts as a medical technician to afford rent in a city that priced out most single people. Someone who'd bought a second-hand appliance out of necessity, not choice, and who'd been genuinely devastated by its failure. As Marcus prepared to leave, Sarah caught his arm. "Please, about the person downstairs, can you tell me how to contact them? I need to apologize, help pay for damages somehow." Marcus looked down at her hand on his arm, at the genuine worry in her eyes, and felt the last of his anger crumble into something more complicated. "I'll make sure they know you're concerned," he managed, gently extracting himself from her touch. Walking back to his car, Marcus realized he was facing a problem far more complex than a simple insurance investigation. Sarah Chen appeared to be exactly what she claimed, a victim of circumstance, not a perpetrator of fraud. But that left him with an impossible question. How could he remain objective about her claim when objectivity might be the one thing that could help rebuild his own flooded life? 3 days later, Marcus was knee-deep in Sarah's financial records when the first inconsistency surfaced. Her bank statements showed regular deposits from Memorial Hospital, just as she'd claimed, but there was something else: a series of cash deposits over the past 6 months, each for exactly $800, made on the 15th of every month like clockwork. Marcus leaned back in his office chair, studying the pattern. $800 cash, monthly, with no corresponding documentation. It could be anything: babysitting, freelance work, family support, but in his experience, people who paid cash usually had reasons for avoiding paper trails. His phone buzzed with a text from his property manager. "Restoration crew needs access to your unit tomorrow 9 a.m. Still staying at your brother's." The reminder of his displaced living situation rekindled the frustration he'd been trying to suppress. Marcus had been sleeping on Tony's couch for 4 days, living out of a suitcase while his basement dried out. The restoration estimate had come back at $12,000, money his insurance would cover, eventually, but the deductible and temporary living expenses were adding up fast. He was contemplating the cash deposits when his desk phone rang. "Rivera? This is Detective Linda Moss, Metro PD. I understand you're investigating a claim for a Sarah Chen on Maple Street." Marcus straightened. Police calls during routine investigations were never good news. "That's correct. Is there a problem?" "Maybe. We've been watching that building as part of an ongoing investigation. Nothing I can discuss in detail, but I'd appreciate knowing if you find anything unusual in your review." After Detective Moss hung up, Marcus stared at Sarah's file with new eyes. What had seemed like a straightforward case was developing layers he hadn't anticipated. The mysterious cash deposits, police interest in the building, and now he was wondering if Sarah's appliance malfunction might be more complicated than a simple mechanical failure. That evening, Marcus found himself doing something he'd never done in 12 years of investigation work. He parked across from his own building and watched. He told himself it was due diligence, extending his investigation into the subject's daily patterns. The truth was more complicated. At 11:30 p.m., Sarah emerged from the building wearing scrubs and carrying a small backpack. She didn't head toward the bus stop that would take her to Memorial Hospital. Instead, she walked 3 blocks east and disappeared into Riley's Pub, a dive bar Marcus knew had a reputation for hosting private poker games in the back room. Marcus felt his stomach sink. Gambling could explain the cash deposits, and gambling debts could provide motive for insurance fraud. Maybe Sarah Chen wasn't the struggling victim she appeared to be. Maybe she was exactly the kind of person who would deliberately flood her apartment for a payout. The next morning brought another surprise. Marcus arrived at his building to meet the restoration crew and found Sarah sitting on the front steps, still in her scrubs from the night before. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and she looked like she'd been crying. "Mr. Rivera." She stood up shakily when she saw him approach. I need to talk to you." Marcus felt alarm bells ringing. In his experience, when claim subjects sought out investigators for unscheduled conversations, they were either about to confess or about to lie more creatively. Ms. Chen, if this is about your claim, I should remind you that anything you say, I know who you are. The words stopped him cold. I figured it out yesterday. You're 3A, aren't you? The basement apartment. Marcus said nothing, but his expression must have confirmed her guess. I am so sorry. Tears started flowing again. I had no idea. When you asked about damage to other units, I should have realized, but I was so focused on my own problems. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. I want to pay for everything. I know I don't have much, but I can set up payments, work extra shifts. Ms. Chen, I can't discuss. There's something else. She interrupted, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The washing machine didn't just malfunction. I might have caused it. Marcus felt the world shift slightly. What do you mean, caused it? Sarah looked around nervously, as if checking for eavesdroppers. Can we go somewhere private? Please? What I need to tell you. It's complicated. Against every professional instinct he possessed, Marcus found himself leading Sarah to a coffee shop 2 blocks away. She ordered black coffee with shaking hands and chose a corner booth far from other customers. The cash deposits you probably found in my bank records, she began, and Marcus tried to keep his surprise off his face. I've been working a second job, off the books. Doing what? Medical consulting. There's a clinic that operates, let's call it informally. They pay me to come in a few nights a week, handle basic procedures for people who can't afford regular health care. Sarah's voice was steady now, but her hands remained clenched around her coffee cup. It's not exactly legal, but it's not exactly illegal either. Gray area medicine. Marcus processed this information. Underground medical clinics existed in every major city, usually serving undocumented immigrants or people avoiding official medical records. If Sarah was working at one, it would explain the cash payments and the police interest in her building. What does this have to do with your washing machine? Sarah took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything valuable. I don't have anything valuable, but they left it torn apart. Couch cushions slashed, drawers dumped, everything searched. She met his eyes. The message was clear. They knew about my second job, and they wanted me to know they could get to me anytime. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Did you report it to police? How could I? I'd have to explain about the clinic, and that would put a lot of vulnerable people at risk. Sarah's voice cracked. So I installed new locks, bought a security camera, and tried to be more careful. But I was paranoid, checking the locks constantly, and 3 nights ago, I was so rattled that I over-tightened the washing machine connections. When I started a load, the pressure blew the hose right off. The pieces were falling into place, but not in any configuration Marcus had anticipated. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth. Because I destroyed your home through my own stupidity, and because, she paused, seemingly struggling with something, because I saw you at Riley's last night. Marcus felt his cheeks burn. I wasn't. You were investigating me. I get it. It's your job. Sarah leaned forward. But I need you to know that I'm not running some kind of scam. I'm just a person who made a series of bad choices and is trying to dig out of the hole they created. As Marcus sat across from this woman who had inadvertently turned his life upside down, he realized that everything about this case had become impossibly complicated. Sarah wasn't a fraud. She was someone caught between helping people who needed medical care and the dangerous attention that work had attracted. Her appliance malfunction was real, just not in the way either of them had initially believed. But now Marcus faced an even more complex dilemma. How could he complete an objective investigation when the truth might put Sarah, and the people she was trying to help, at serious risk? Marcus spent the weekend wrestling with a decision that would define both his career and his conscience. Sarah's confession had transformed everything. What started as a routine investigation had become a choice between following protocol and protecting someone whose only crime was helping people who couldn't afford health care. On Monday morning, he sat across from his supervisor Bill Hartman, the completed investigation file on the desk between them. The official report was technically accurate. Washing machine malfunctioned due to improper installation and maintenance, resulting in water damage to the insured's unit and potential impact to neighboring properties. Marcus had documented everything required for claim approval while carefully omitting any mention of underground clinics or break-ins. "Looks straightforward," Bill said, flipping through the pages. "Payouts within normal range for this type of damage. You recommend approval?" Marcus nodded, trying to ignore the weight of what he wasn't saying. "Equipment failure, no evidence of fraud. Ms. Chen appears to be a legitimate victim of circumstance." But as Bill signed off on the claim, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text that made his blood run cold. "Your neighbor's story checks out. The clinic got raided Friday night. Thought you should know. Detective Moss." Marcus excused himself and immediately called the detective back. "What happened at the raid?" "Immigration sweep, mostly. Nothing directly related to your case, but we found some interesting connections. The building on Maple Street has been under surveillance because the landlord's been renting to people involved in various gray market activities. Your Ms. Chen was smart to be paranoid." After hanging up, Marcus realized Sarah was probably terrified, possibly out of work, and definitely in more danger than before. The responsible thing would be to stay out of it. His job was done, the claim was approved, case closed. But the image of Sarah's exhausted face, her genuine remorse about his flooded apartment, and her willingness to risk her safety helping others wouldn't leave him alone. That evening, Marcus found himself knocking on apartment 4B again, this time as himself rather than as an investigator. Sarah opened the door looking haggard, with dark circles under her eyes and the jumpiness of someone expecting bad news. "Marcus, is everything okay with the claim?" "The claim's approved. That's not why I'm here." He held up a bag from the Thai restaurant down the street. "I figured you might not have eaten today, and I wanted to talk." Sarah's suspicious expression softened slightly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Marcus met her eyes. "I heard about the raid. I know you're probably scared, maybe out of work, and I know this whole situation is my fault somehow." "Your fault?" Sarah stepped aside to let him in. "How is any of this your fault?" As they sat at her small kitchen table sharing pad thai and spring rolls, Marcus found himself explaining something he'd never told anyone. "After my divorce, I became obsessed with control. Everything in my apartment had its place. Every routine was planned, every risk calculated. I thought if I could just control my environment perfectly, nothing could hurt me again." Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding in understanding. "But control is an illusion," Marcus continued. "Your washing machine taught me that. Sometimes disasters just happen, and the only thing that matters is how people respond to them." He gestured around her sparse apartment. "You could have filed your claim and disappeared. Instead, you've been trying to make things right, even when it puts you at risk." "I destroyed your home," Sarah said quietly. "Accidentally, while you were helping people who had nowhere else to go." Marcus leaned forward. "I've been investigating insurance fraud for 12 years, and I've seen real criminals. You're not one of them." They talked until nearly midnight, sharing stories about their work, their fears, their attempts to build meaningful lives in a city that often felt indifferent to individual struggles. Marcus learned that Sarah had gotten into underground medicine after watching her grandmother die because she couldn't afford insulin. Sarah learned that Marcus had become an investigator after his ex-wife's addiction led to multiple fraudulent claims that nearly destroyed their finances. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked as he prepared to leave. "With the clinic shut down." Sarah shrugged, but he could see the worry in her eyes. Find something else, I guess. The hospital work barely covers rent, but maybe I can pick up extra shifts. What if there was another option? Marcus hadn't planned to make the offer, but seeing Sarah's determination despite her circumstances made the decision for him. My insurance company has a medical consulting division. We investigate complex claims involving medical devices, treatments, procedures. It's legitimate work, good pay, and they're always looking for people with real medical experience. Sarah stared at him. You'd recommend me? Even after everything? Especially after everything. Marcus stood up. You care about helping people, you understand both sides of healthcare economics, and you've proven you'll do what's right even when it costs you personally. That's exactly what the job requires. 3 days later, Marcus received an email that made him smile for the first time since his basement had flooded. Sarah Chen had been hired as a medical consultant for Consolidated Insurance Group's Fraud Prevention Division. Her first assignment would be reviewing suspicious medical device claims, legitimate work that would pay twice what she'd made at the underground clinic. But the real surprise came that evening when Marcus found an envelope slipped under his apartment door. Inside was a handwritten note and a check for $500. Marcus, this is the first installment toward paying back what I owe you for the damage. I know it's not much, but I wanted you to know I haven't forgotten. Thank you for giving me a chance to start over. I promise I'll earn your trust. Sarah. P.S. I'm having the washing machine connections in all the units professionally inspected. No more DIY plumbing for me. As Marcus stood in his still-drying basement, reading Sarah's note by the light of construction lamps, he realized something fundamental had shifted. The disaster that had initially felt like a loss of control had actually taught him something more valuable. Sometimes the best outcomes come from letting go of rigid expectations and choosing to trust people's better angels. Tomorrow, he'd return Sarah's check with a note explaining that her insurance payout had covered his damages. But tonight, Marcus found himself genuinely grateful for the flood that had forced him to see beyond his own carefully controlled world and recognize the complex, imperfect, and ultimately decent person living right above him. 6 months later, Marcus was reviewing quarterly reports when Sarah knocked on his office door. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the exhausted, paranoid woman he'd first investigated. In her place stood a confident professional wearing a tailored blazer, her hair styled instead of hastily pulled back, carrying herself with the assurance of someone who'd found their place in the world. Got a minute for your star consultant? She asked with a grin that had become familiar around the office. Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sarah had quickly proven herself invaluable to the medical fraud division, catching discrepancies that other investigators missed and bringing an understanding of healthcare economics that had already saved the company hundreds of thousands in fraudulent payouts. More importantly, she'd found legitimate channels for her passion to help people, working with community health advocates to identify patterns of medical fraud that particularly targeted vulnerable populations. Bill wants to see us both upstairs, Sarah said, settling into the chair. Something about the Morrison case. The Morrison case had been their first major collaboration, a complex scheme involving fake medical device prescriptions that Sarah's expertise had unraveled in ways Marcus never could have managed alone. Working together, they'd discovered a network of corrupt doctors and medical supply companies that had been bilking insurance companies for millions. Before we go up, Marcus said, I wanted to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Congratulations on making senior consultant. The promotion's official as of Monday. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the offer letter. Senior consultant. Marcus, I've only been here 6 months. You've closed more cases in 6 months than most investigators handle in 2 years. Bill thinks you have potential for management track. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Besides, the company needs people who understand that not every claim is black and white. You bring perspective the rest of us lack. As they walked to Bill's office, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that early morning flood. His basement apartment had been completely renovated, better than before, actually, with updated flooring and a sophisticated water detection system. But the real renovation had happened in his approach to both work and life. Rivera, Chen, good timing, Bill greeted them. I've got news about the Morrison network. The FBI raid last week turned up evidence of 17 additional medical practices involved in the scheme. The Department of Justice estimates you've helped us identify over 40 million in fraudulent claims. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. The Morrison investigation had started with Sarah noticing an unusual pattern in prosthetic device claims, prescriptions that didn't match patient diagnoses, all traced back to a small network of clinics. What had seemed like routine fraud had uncovered one of the largest medical billing conspiracies in the state's history. There's going to be media attention, Bill continued. Good attention. The company's being recognized for innovative investigative techniques, and you two are going to be the face of that campaign. After the meeting, Sarah and Marcus found themselves in the elevator together, both still processing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. $40 million, Sarah said quietly. That's enough to provide real health care for thousands of people. Is that what you're thinking about? The people who'll get help because we caught the fraudsters? Sarah nodded. It's different from the clinic work, but maybe more effective in the long run. Every fraudulent claim we stop means more resources for legitimate patients. Marcus smiled. You've found your calling, haven't you? I think so. What about you? Any regrets about getting involved in my messy life? They'd reached the ground floor, but neither moved to exit the elevator. This had become a recurring moment between them, conversations that felt too important to end just because they'd reached a destination. The only regret I have, Marcus said carefully, is that it took a disaster to teach me something I should have learned years ago, which is that the most important investigations aren't about proving people are lying. They're about understanding why people make the choices they do and finding ways to help them make better ones. Sarah studied his face. Is that your professional philosophy or your personal one? Both, I think. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved from adversarial to professional to something that felt like friendship, but carried undercurrents neither had directly addressed. They'd shared dinners, collaborated on cases, and gradually built a trust that went beyond their work relationship, but there was always the memory of how they'd met, the flood, the investigation, the ethical complexity of their early interactions. Marcus, Sarah said as the elevator doors opened again, would you like to have dinner tonight? Not work dinner, not neighbor dinner. Just dinner. Marcus felt something settle into place, like tumblers in a lock finally aligning. I'd like that very much. Good. My place at 7? I promise the washing machine is professionally installed now. As Sarah walked away, Marcus realized that the flood 6 months ago had been the best disaster of his life. It had cost him some furniture and temporarily displaced him from his apartment, but it had given him something more valuable, a partner who shared his commitment to helping people, a friend who understood the complexity of doing right in an imperfect world, and possibly, if he was reading the signs correctly, something even more meaningful than either professional success or personal recovery. That evening, as Marcus climbed the familiar stairs to apartment 4B, he carried a bottle of wine and the knowledge that sometimes the most important investigations are the ones we conduct into our own assumptions about other people. Sarah's door opened before he could knock, and her smile suggested she'd been watching for him. Welcome back, she said, and Marcus realized she wasn't just talking about his arrival at her apartment. After 2 years of carefully controlling his environment to avoid getting hurt, he was finally ready to let someone else flood his life again, this time on purpose, and with much better results. The insurance investigator and the woman who'd flooded his basement had become something neither had expected, partners in every sense of the word, building something new from the wreckage of their first disaster together.